Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. This afternoon I thought I would speak a bit about wisdom, panya, a very important quality, maybe the most important quality. There's a Jewish story that God asked King Solomon what gift he could give him, and King Solomon asked for wisdom because he said, with wisdom everything else will follow. Wisdom is also considered one of the two supreme qualities of a Buddha, which are wisdom and compassion. It's one of the paramis, it's one of the faculties, one of the indriya, the five faculties. So we need to consider what the definition of wisdom is, panya, and it's important to separate it from knowledge or vidya. The two qualities have some relation point. In the Visuddhimagga, Buddhaghosa calls knowledge the soil from which wisdom grows. Knowledge is the mastery or accumulation of facts or technical details, but wisdom goes beyond that. It's a true understanding. It's possible for someone to be highly educated with many facts and details, but to not really understand them in the depth, not to have the real wisdom of understanding. It's also possible for someone to be innately wise or have a natural wisdom without having accumulated knowledge. So the two do not necessarily go together, although they can certainly have a relationship. Buddhaghosa, as the author of the Visuddhimagga, he had a lot of influence in all the Theravada world, but especially I think in Burma he had a strong influence. And Burma took a particularly keen interest in Abhidhamma studies and in Vipassana. Those two aspects of the Dhamma represent knowledge and wisdom. The Abhidhamma is a way of studying the workings of the mind in detail, and wisdom can come from contemplation of the mass of details, of getting into the details of how things work, and then the big picture can emerge from the fine detail. Vipassana is a practice of directly looking at the mind and letting wisdom arise spontaneously or naturally through the clear seeing of the objects of the mind. Wisdom is defined as understanding according to reality and not otherwise. The opposite of wisdom would be confusion or delusion. And of course there are grades and degrees, types of wisdom. There's worldly or conventional wisdom, just the ordinary understanding of living your life, having common sense, making wise decisions, being able to live in a worldly way with some wisdom. We sometimes call that common sense, which is actually not all that common. The higher wisdom is seeing into the nature of samsara, penetrating the nature of reality. And it's in particular seeing the three characteristics, which is what should develop with insight meditation. One sees the unsatisfactory nature of phenomena, the impermanent nature, and the emptiness. And this is a real wisdom. This is a very deep and powerful wisdom that leads to disenchantment, dispassion, liberation, and awakening. There's some things that could be said about the balancing of wisdom, having a balanced wisdom. Like many of the factors of the path, they need to be coordinated or balanced with other factors. There's a model in Tibetan Buddhism, a scheme of 4 or 5 wisdoms, and I've seen different versions of this, but it's often done as a mandala with 5 Buddhas and representing different colors, representing the different wisdoms. And the 4 are out on the sides, and the one in the center, if the list is of 5, the one in the center will be the diamond wisdom, or the Vajra wisdom, which is the union of all the others. But the 4 kinds of wisdom here are 2 balanced pairs. There's the wisdom of equanimity, or the equalizing wisdom, paired with discriminating wisdom. And that particular pair has a very immediate practical application. These are 2 aspects of wisdom. Both are important. Both help us to see reality. But we're limited if we're just depending on one side. The discriminating wisdom is the clear distinguishing of characteristics of phenomena, to understand the difference. For example, looking at the process in the mind, you know this is a thought, this is a memory, this is an emotion, and so on. And you know this is wholesome, this is unwholesome. You know this is wise, this is confused. You're able to distinguish particular characteristics of phenomena, because in some way every single phenomena is unique. It has its own particular flavor, you might say, its own quality. And being able to clearly distinguish is important. Satipatthana Sutta talks about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It always says, like, for example, with the body, it says, contemplating the body, let there be just the body. Contemplating feelings, let there be just feelings, and so on. Because you want to be able to distinguish clearly what is body, what is feeling, what is sensation, what is emotion, what is thought, and not muddle them all together. And there's no hope of ever gaining any understanding if everything is just a big muddle. So the discriminating wisdom is being able to distinguish clearly the differences between things. But the equalizing wisdom is to see the core ways in which phenomena are the same or share salient characteristics, and these are the 3 marks of suffering, impermanence, and emptiness or not self. To see those universal characteristics in phenomena. So although every possible Dhamma or phenomena will have its unique flavor, its style, effect, cause, and so on, it's still going to be dukkha, anicca, anatta. That's what is common to all phenomena. And that's what the equalizing wisdom penetrates. The other pair I've seen different translations for, but they could be called wisdoms of nibbana and the wisdom of samsara. Sometimes they're called the wisdom of the deathless and the wisdom of impermanence. So one side is seeing samsara, seeing the nature of samsara, seeing life and death, birth and death, seeing changeableness of phenomena, how nothing is permanent, how everything is in a constant flux, and everything is running around in a circle. That's samsara. Samsarati means to wander in a circle, or to wander aimlessly. So understand the nature of samsara. So that's like the first noble truth. But the third noble truth is there's an end to suffering, and to see the possibility, the goal, the orientation towards the unconditioned, towards nibbana, towards freedom. So there's that polarity of understanding the conditioned and the unconditioned. It's necessary to understand the conditioned. One would never be able to approach the unconditioned without having plumbed the depths of the conditioned. But one cannot stop there. One can't stop with the conditioned. That just leads to despair. There has to be a sense that there's another side, there is another shore. And the union of these four is the Vajra wisdom, or the supreme wisdom. Another way of balancing wisdom, I've already touched on, I think, I'll say a bit more about it, is wisdom balanced with knowledge and how they work together. This is vidya and panya. In some way, if you want to use a physical or a neurological model, you could say this is like the understanding of the left brain and the right brain. And the two types of understanding complement each other. They don't need to be opposed to each other. They can actually strengthen each other. The accumulation of knowledge by itself can be a big asset to the emerging of wisdom. As the Buddhaghosa said, it's the soil from which wisdom grows. But there's also a danger of a trap here, and that one can develop a kind of arrogance of knowledge. And by accumulating dry facts and definitions and mistaking those for true wisdom, you can get stuck. It's always a danger in the spiritual life to think that you've got something fully figured out. It's better to have good questions than it is to have definitive answers. To be open to new exploration all the time. The danger is that with accumulation of knowledge, that you can fool yourself into thinking you understand something because you have a definition, you have labels to put on it. Maybe you have labels in Pali or Sanskrit, you think you're really clever, and you put them away and you put it away and forget about it. And you've kind of blocked yourself from any further exploration in that direction. But if you keep an open mind, a question mark mind, being always open to new discoveries, new exploration, then you can have growth. Early on in my study of and practice of Buddhism, it would bother me if I came across contradictory statements from like two different teachers that had some different interpretations of something like the nature of jhana or the proper way of meditating or something. It would really bother me to try and sort that out. And then I come to the point where it doesn't bother me anymore. It's just, it becomes a point of interest. Here's two different ways of understanding. Who knows which is correct? Just keep the mind open and be prepared to explore. It's been said that there are two times in the spiritual path where a lot of reading and study is important. It's right at the beginning to give yourself a grounding, and then when you're more spiritually mature and you have gained some direct understanding, to be able to put it into context and to give you a vocabulary so that you can teach. That's one opinion, which is maybe a little extreme. I think it's always useful to have some study along the way to help put things in context. But those are probably the two moments when it's most important. Knowledge can assist wisdom in another way, in that when you have experiences and you have experienced some depth of reality, going back to the formal categories and definitions can help you to clarify it and put it in context and make sense of it. But you should never forget the description of a thing is not the thing itself. Reading a cookbook does not satisfy the appetite. And there's the old Zen saying about the finger pointing at the moon. This one fellow's pointing up the moon to the other fellow, and the second fellow focuses on the man's finger. He misses the moon. Finally, one more aspect of balancing wisdom. Another pair, I mentioned the wisdom and compassion, Panya and Karuna, are the supreme qualities of a Buddha. And in the mind of a Buddha, there's no difference between the two. The two come together perfectly. There's no separation between wisdom and compassion. But they are two, for anyone on the path, they are two qualities that need to be developed in harmony, because they inform each other and they enrich each other. And one without the other is spiritually dangerous. Compassion developed without any wisdom leads one into trouble, because you have compassion for the suffering of beings, but if that's going to be effective to actually help alleviate suffering, it has to be governed by wisdom. There's often the impulse in people they see somebody in suffering and they just want to jump in and do something about it, and very often make things worse by their meddling. So any action undertaken with compassion has to also come from wisdom to make sure it's effective and it's actually going to reduce suffering. And that sometimes means the wisdom to see there's nothing I can do about this situation. That doesn't mean a lessening of compassion. It just is a clear recognition that you're helpless in this situation to do any good. But if there is an intervention you can make, then if it's guided by wisdom, you'll make an effective one and you'll actually reduce the suffering. Wisdom also tells us that there's always going to be suffering and imperfection in the world. That's the nature of samsara. And we don't let ourselves be overwhelmed by it. We recognize that it's just part of conditioned reality. So we don't get lost by it. But we still have compassion for the suffering of beings, including our own suffering. And we take action when appropriate and with the skillful means, upaya. Wisdom without compassion becomes equally dangerous in another direction, because it can become cold and apathetic. You can have an understanding that all beings are empty, everything is impermanent and suffering, and develop an attitude of not caring, of apathy towards the world. An example, the extreme example that I've heard of this misuse of the wisdom teachings are amongst the Japanese samurai, and particularly in the 20th century in their wars in China. The Japanese soldiers with the Zen samurai tradition behind them felt that all beings were empty, and if they killed somebody, if they cut off his head with a sword, there's no merit and no demerit made. It's only void atoms passing through void atoms. Which on a strictly technical level, that's actually true. It is just void atoms passing through void atoms, but it's obviously a misuse of that teaching. If you give yourself permission thereby to slaughter living beings. So that's an extreme example, but I think many times it's tempting to just develop a cold-heartedness by falling back on the teachings of emptiness. The wisdom of the Buddha joins compassion and wisdom and knows that although there are no actual beings on a metaphysical level, there's no selves, there's no individuals, no Pudgala, but there is suffering. Suffering is a real, it's a Paramatadhamma. So one can have wisdom and compassion together and have a wise compassion and a compassionate wisdom. Joining the two together is the way of the Buddha.
Punnadhammo Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dada Mase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu